you work? Private studio like yours, or is that what it's called?
No, it's not.
Now to me, I would really like to see his hair lie down in this kind of crazy area. Okay? To me, the only way that's going to happen is if there's length. So I'm going to maintain that area, but I really want to focus on stuff below that. Because I want to maintain that and I want things to look maybe a little bit wider, instead of taking my section so high and narrow with the center parting, I'm going to take it the opposite and take it quite low. Okay? So maybe I'm going to go a little bit below the parietal ridge. How I look at sectioning is the higher the section, the more opportunity to go higher and tighter. The lower the section, the more opportunity to keep it lower. Okay? Lower and tighter. Or lower and longer even. So I'm going to take quite a low horseshoe. Also, for these random bits, that's the one thing that's really hard about men's hair, is controlling your sections when it's so short sometimes. Has anyone heard of a guy named Ivan Zoot? Yeah. Ivan Zoot created these kind of Velcro pads. And you can just, boom, flip your hair away. Easy,
Oh, we want
easy.
some of those.
That's really cool. Or very cool.
Do you take into consideration some of your crown area? Do you take them as like a V instead of more of a horseshoe?
100%. My question, or I mean my answer for that kind of statement would be, depends on where I want my weight to be removed. So if I brought it into a V, I would probably bring it up and around the round of head in this area, which means I would tend to remove more weight there. Does that make sense? So I really focus on the shape of my section as to where I want my weight to be maintained and where I want the weight to be removed.
Because I find it like sometimes when I have a male with like a wide head, I'll actually take that almost like a bit of a triangle on the sides for the ear and I'll actually go higher and lower.
100%.
So you take that weight line out so it doesn't look so big this way.
Yeah, I think that is 100% correct. It's all relative. You know, there's no right way, there's no wrong way. This is just my way. Okay, a little bit of disinfectant. The reason I disinfect is because this tool is always touching the skin, so I don't want to be like cross-contaminating or anything like that. Does anyone have any ideas why they believe barbering might have started going out of style? Okay, maybe I'll talk about that after I start doing this haircut. Yeah. So now this is going to be what I call baseline haircut. This is where I'm going to start in the middle of the haircut. Okay? Before I started at the bottom, now we're going to start up here. My comb is going to help me elevate the hair. It's going to allow me to spread it out evenly across a flat plane. Okay? This is what's really important to create really strong shapes. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to find my hair, give myself an angle, and that's my baseline. So it's a horizontal cut, maintaining the length and weight up through the parietal ridge. Coming through here, you can see there's a lot more hair that's going to come out. but he also has some divots in his head. So another thing that I think is different about men's hair is it's not about everything being the same length all the time. Okay? If you're trying to hide like a dented head, you know, you've got to keep those dents longer in order to keep a nice silhouette. You need to fill in the space. Okay? So when I think, this is the best way I can describe it. I think of a random head shape kind of be like this, okay? You gotta think, on the convex of the head shape, all the hair kind of grows away from each other. But once you get into the concave, it all grows in towards each other. So even though everything is cut to the same length, where is it gonna look thicker? Where is it gonna look denser? Right? So you gotta keep that in mind, okay? If I wanted to make sure that this all looked the same length, I need to keep the length quite long. If I go in and start exposing the scalp and taking this really short, you know, then you're gonna have to do something about this area. Is it gonna affect your shape? Probably. That's where I talk, that's what I talk about, like, what's more important, your fade or your shape, okay? Because I think a proper head shape is better than a proper fade. I'm not saying that fades aren't important, but perfecting a head shape is primary. As well, I'm just going to go through my haircut from one side to the other, just creating my baseline. Because this is going to be where I start to blend everything up to.
And that's going to do a 2.
This would be a 2 right now, yeah? It would be a 2 at the bottom of my baseline.
Your other line comb that you have, is it a little bit thinner than the black one?
Oh, no, they're the exact same comb.
Okay.
All depends on what color hair I'm working with.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, I just want to make sure that my baseline is created all the way through till when I can have a 2 right on the scalp. So I want to make sure the very bottom of my section is a 2. So, I think this is something I kind of forgot to touch base on. When I was talking about blade design, this is also very important, okay? A 1A is the longest blade that you can get that's going to be flat. Okay, so where I can really focus on pivoting the weight on my blade. Once you go to a 1.5, it becomes rounded. And then once something becomes rounded, it's designed to follow the head shape. So it's really hard to create a square shape with a round tool. Does that make sense? Can you see the difference there? It's very minute. Maybe when I'm done with this tool, I will pass it around so that you can see what I'm talking about. And then just to remove all the bulk that I need, I'm just going to work up into that baseline. I don't want to go too high to compromise my shape that I just created, but I want to go in and remove the bulk. Some people call it gutting it out. So that's really all I'm doing. I'm gutting it out. And I'm still trying to pivot everything off of his head shape. Because that, any kind of anchor point, pivot point, is going to help create a nice, smooth shape. Now when it's kind of a shape like so, and I have like a tube, now I start to work backwards. This is when I start to use any kind of guard. Because he's at a tube, I'm going to change my technique or my tool to a taper blade. Can someone tell me why? Because I'm not going to be working off of his head shape anymore. Now I'm going to be doing more of a scooping motion, a flick of the wrist motion, that kind of idea. I'm going from an extreme short to an extreme long in a short amount of distance. So I'm going to get him to tilt his head down. You're not going to hear a lot come off because a 1.5 is what I'm using. And because of the thickness of the blade that's in here, it is the most similar to a 2. If I was to put a 2 on, it would be longer than what I just did. Because a 2 and a 2 are calibrated at the same length, but then you have to keep into consideration the metal that's in your clipper that you choose. Does that make sense? This is why it's important to really know your tools. Like I said, I start working backwards, so I work from my longest length to my shortest. The only time I open and close my blade with any kind of guard is with a number 1. So I start with my guard open with a number 1 to help kind of blend out these corners, some of his neckline, maybe some of these dark spots. I might go in with my secondary cutting position just to remove a bit of weight. Now I'm going to close it. This is more of a 1. I'm just really trying to work at removing his really dark neckline. You can see that everything down here is far darker than the rest.
What kind of clipper is that?
This is a cordless designer. So the magic clip is a fade blade. The designer is a taper blade. I don't care about what clipper it is, I care about the blade. It could be Andis, it could be Oster, whatever your favorite tool line is, please use that. But all I'm worried about is the kind of blade. The blade design is what is important. Okay, and understanding where to use each blade is all of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So now I take off my guard, I go to an open blade. And now I'm just going to scoop at this dark stuff. Now I'm going to go half open, half closed, however you like to look at it. And then all the way closed, just to hit the very bottom. Okay, so I work. Just a little recap. I do my baseline. I do my 2, I do my 1.5, I do my 1, I do my open, I do my half open, I do my close. So I work from my longest length down to my shortest. Every time you go to a shorter length, you got to be careful to not go too high so that you don't compromise your shape. Okay? Very important. Be very, very precise about where you're placing your your lengths as you go shorter, okay? There we go. All right, now when we're working with a baseline, okay? Last time I took all of my sections vertical. That removes most weight. If I want some control and I want to maintain more weight, I like to use horizontal. Because my baseline is a horizontal line all the way around, I got a beautiful, simple guide to follow. There's no guessing here. So I'm going to comb my hair down into my guide. I'm going to elevate so I can see I can take some hair off here. You got to also be careful as to what your elevation is. If you elevate so high, you might remove too much ball. If you elevate too low, you might maintain too much. I'm just going to maintain extra length through the front and still take that off. Another section. Just working up the head, bringing the hair back down to where I want to cut it. That's my guide. So low elevation. I'm going to start to not cut very much off. This. I want to maintain one of this, but this can be connected. And just check one more. I like to go just past half head, because there's no point to go all the way to the other side, because I'm just going to cut all that off anyways. Okay. So I go just past center, see what I need to remove.
Each section the same guide, or are you moving your guide back?
Elevation, slightly going up the head. Slightly, not much though.
But wouldn't that just determine the hair, if the hair was coarse or fine?
100%, yeah. All depends on what you're looking for. If you want it to be more mushroomy, maybe you keep your elevation all the way down. And I want this to be quite symmetric, so I'm going to connect everything that needs to be. As well, if you want the crown to come back, this literally has to be like the longest point of the haircut almost. Because my crown, I got a double crown, and I need a lot of weight in my hair in order to overcome that growth pattern. Female hair, you don't really have to worry about that because it's so long and heavy. Growth patterns, like it's hard that they ever come into play. But the moment you start cutting hair this short, it is so important to understand that, okay? Because if you cut it too short, it's just going to spring up on you. So this is why I really like cutting these areas on a horizontal, because that's going to help me create more weight, more bulk, which creates more control, okay? Center. Do you guys know the product line Gruzel? Yeah, that's who I used to educate for. This is where I really learned about baseline haircutting. You know, my freehand haircutting I learned from a guy named Kurt Kiefner. Does anyone know who that he is? Kurt's the guy who created the Aveda Men's curriculum and the Aveda Men's product. Anything to do with Aveda Men is Kurt's doing. So I think I have really great mentors that have brought me to this point. Okay. So that's all I'm gonna do for wet cutting at this point. I'm gonna grab this. Just because he does have like a lighter texture of hair again, and it's not super dark, I'm gonna automatically go for the gel.
Short or long, do you always use gel?
Not always. Really, it depends on what I'm doing. If he's got darker hair, harder to control, I want something with moisture because it's going to soften the hair and make it more malleable. But because his hair, I could put anything in it and I'm going to be able to mold it however I want. So I want something that's going to make his hair look thicker rather than ease of styling. Does that make sense? If he had Asian hair and it was just like, I would want something to soften it so that it would help me lie it down better. But with all that oil and the cream, I feel it might make him look too greasy. And I don't want to make him look greasy in front of you guys.
Yeah, I agree, you know what, with men's hair, when it's fine, if it's wet looking, it looks thinner.
Yeah, right? Like it looks thinner. Once we blow dry him, he won't look greasy. When I'm blow drying as well, I tend to start at the hardest spots. So I can tell that this area is going to be kind of hard to control. So I'm going to go straight there. I'm going to blow dry that down to help me create the best look. Another thing I'm going to keep in, or tell you guys, difference between men and women. Guys like the volume to be in the front. Women like the volume to be in the back. Okay? So I'm always looking to have that pop and everything to be in the front. I want the emphasis to be here, not in the crown. Okay? Sometimes I blow the front forward to give a little extra height. His hair goes up like a dream. I don't even have to show that anymore. Okay. So in the back, because of where I cut all of my baseline, it seems quite heavy right here. I'll show you how to blend that out. what I like to do is all of my blending, I do when it's dry. I don't want to do any blending when it's wet because I'm looking at the weight of the water that's collected in the hair. So it could potentially make me take too much hair off. Now all of a sudden I've created a hole. So if I'm really focused on removing the bulk of the hair, I want to see what the hair is, not what the water is. Okay? So blending shear. You comb everything down to that point. You can see that line that I'm talking about right there. I'm going to blending shear over comb, working really, really slow, just to remove that. I'm not going deep into my work. I'm just refining my work. Now, once that is gone, start to work on a vertical. Remove a little bit of that point from one side to the other. This to me just melts everything together so nicely. I work all the way up the head shape. One side to the other.
You keep saying don't go into the cut shear, blending shear. Is that so you don't take away the shape that you've created?
That and take too much bulk out. Okay. If I want something to really control itself, if I start putting random bits and pieces in it, how am I going to control it? Especially with curly hair, for example. If I go in and I start putting all these random pieces into this curly hair, curl clumps in a lump, right? So if I break up that lump, it's going to go frizzy on me. So you want to control that by keeping bulk, you know? So I'm really just trying to go through and refine any kind of sandwiching that I might have created, anything like that. And because I over-directed everything to one side to the other, it's obviously going to be extra long down the center. So I'm just kind of really trying to blend the extreme short to the extreme long, okay? And not by removing weight, by just refining my mistakes. I did that on that side, now I'll come to this side. Alright, okay, since we were talking about this, you guys pass these around and really look at how one is flat and one is rounded, please. When it comes to going around the ear, I really like to look at the ears of the clock. Okay, so the front of the clock, I go 3 o'clock back to noon. On the back side of the clock, I work from 9 o'clock forward to noon. The reason I do this is because typically the hair in front of the ear grows forward The hair behind the ear grows backwards. So if I go just in one direction, I'm gonna miss half of the hair. So I'll move back to the other side. I'm gonna go from now it's gonna be 9 o'clock to noon. Now it's gonna be 3 o'clock to noon. Sometimes I pull the ear back to really get the hair there. When it comes to outlining, the only place that I will do an outline is on the outline, not the neckline, okay? This is the neckline, behind the ear is the outline. That's the only place I'm gonna create a sharp line.
Are you using just the corner of that, or are you using the whole?
Flat.
Flat against that?
Now I'm gonna use some clay. I like really emulsify it in my hands, make sure I can see it on all parts of my hands, please.
So is this the latest trend?
I would say a lot, like, I like seeing these looks get longer. I'm not about like a bald fade pompadour anymore, but something with a little bit of romance to it, I think is where it's at, okay? I like the long bits with the shorter on the sides, but if there could be a little bit more flow on the sides, I think that would be on point for sure. Just a little bit longer. I feel, I'm not like, when it comes to trend, I like to look at guys as individuals, so I'm not really trying to put the same haircut on every guy. I'm really trying to create a character.
So when you say a little bit longer on the sides now, like going,
Then now, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what then would you begin with,
The baseline haircut.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And then I would work my way down. No way to really show you how I would do it without having an example.
Right.
But when the hair is so long on the sides, and you do a baseline, say 2 inches from the head, as you comb the hair down, you'll have a guide to follow. But really, we'll work on it on our napkins. That I will definitely show you on our napkins.
Okay.
But it's hard to demonstrate when I just don't have enough hair.
Yeah, because I noticed yours is longer too on the sides. So to actually start or have a haircut start at that length versus really short to the head.
100%.
Yeah.
We're going to touch on that
Okay.
for sure. Okay.
Previously, before you started
That's one of the usual I was looking for. It's like, I don't want those big posse.
Like a comeback?
Yes.
Okay. How I kind of think it was is barbers, like back in the day when long hair started coming into play, Beatles, I don't know, whoever, whenever it really started happening, I like to think it's the Beatles, but maybe it's not. Barbers didn't know and or want to deal with long hair. They're just like, no, like guys get their hair cut short and that's how we're gonna do it. So then people started, or guys started going to unisex salons, where they started using female techniques on men because they were wearing their hair longer. Okay? So then we started getting into that, and then the barbering techniques really started to kind of fall to the wayside. But then now all of a sudden, guys want barbered looks. And no one really knew how to do it except for barbers. So that's why barbering started to come back up. But in my opinion, for like I opened a barber shop, I don't want barbering to go out of style, you know? So my plan to make sure that it doesn't go out of style is continued education. When guys do grow their hair out long, how do we work with that? You know, like when they do want to wear it in a ponytail, like how are we going to give a masculine looking long haircut? You know, we have to evolve with the times, or else the times are gonna evolve without us. That's how I see it. Okay, so if his hair was really hard to style, literally, you can see that he's got some kind of back combing going on, right? And then you could use your trusty old pick to just kind of like pick out the front so that you can hide that kind of beehive underneath it. But he doesn't really need it because it's super easy to style his hair. But I just wanted to kind of show that to you because I know probably none of you have seen that before. Am I correct? Well, I would have to say this is a completed look. All right? Look good to you? It's not a huge change, you know, but like you saw me do a different cutting technique, you know, different angles, everything. So that's if anything is kind of like this or longer, do a baseline haircut. Anything that's going to be high and tight, like this haircut here, I do the freehand. So that's where I really make my deciding decisions between one or the other.
And you wouldn't come up any higher than what you came up right now?
Not necessarily, like I like the kind of scalp coverage and exposure here. I don't want to white wall them just to white wall them. You know, I think, you know,
No, it's good.
I've done that a lot. So.
Yeah.
So, you're in, or you're done. Cool. What time is it?